My objective in doing this session today, which Al told me about a week ago, so kind of forgive me for some of the slides, I wanted to talk about the value of people analytics to the organization, but also the value of people analytics for our employees. And talking about organizational value is to help you build a business case. And for some of you, it might give you some new ideas of people analytics to do that have given value to other organizations. And it might be an opportunity for you to give value to your organizations. But for all of you, this presentation is going to also be about how do you use people analytics for the good of employees? And what's the employee value proposition? We've been talking a lot about that, so I hope I have a few ideas to share. And if nothing else, maybe I have a couple of frameworks that you can think about how to create value in your organizations. Forgive me for my raspy voice. I'm Lexy Martin. I'm a principal research customer value from Visier. I'm a really long-time researcher. I've been doing research for about 40 years, and before that, 12 years as a practitioner. And I used to manage the Sierra Cedar HR Systems survey that looked at HR technology adoption and the value that organizations get from that adoption. But what you may not know is that I've also done a lot of value engineering work. I probably built the ROI model for every human capital management vendor out there, with the exception of a few. I think about value all the time. And I actually use data to make decisions in my own life. And the reason I'm at Visier is that when I was managing the Sierra Cedar survey, starting back in the year 2000, I saw that organizations that adopted people analytics, we actually called it reporting and analytics back then, from 2000 on to when I retired, the one category that delivered value, correlated to financial value consistently, was people analytics. And so when I retired 5 years ago, couldn't stand being retired. I'm not a retiring type. I decided to come back to work in a field that I thought was actually making a difference in organizations. So I use data in my personal life to make decisions. Yeah, I'm not the only researcher that looks at value. I think all of the major research firms that do anything around people analytics can show you that if they look at organizations in the aggregate, those that have people analytics versus those that don't, they have higher financial value. It's a fact of our research. And I think these studies by Burson, by Corporate Leadership Council, by Sierra Cedar are incredibly valuable to help organizations kind of know which technologies to adopt next that may be able to deliver value to the organization. But I don't think they do a real good job of helping you make your business case. You can't go to your boss and say, well, if you adopt people analytics, you're going to make 19% more revenue. It isn't as direct as that. I think, though, that stories about others that have created value perhaps really do help make the case for people analytics. And so when I started at Visier, my boss said, I know you can do surveys. Go out and talk to customers. Go out and actually talk to people that are doing something and see what's going on with them. So what I found 3.5 years ago when I first started doing this was that our customers are on a journey to value. And let me share what that looks like. So they immediately got value by adopting a technology solution that was more cost-effective than another one. Like a people analytics platform is honestly cheaper than building out your own warehouse, doing dashboards, doing visualizations, doing all the sophisticated analytics that so many organizations are doing. So it was a more cost-effective solution for them. More importantly, though, it helped them scale their reporting and analytics staff. So no longer did they have to be spending time on extracting data, moving it into ways that could be visualized, doing analysis. They were freed from that, and they could immediately get on to being the kind of analysts and strategists that we really want them to be in our organizations. My nervousness is probably getting in the way of this all the time, forgive me. So immediate value, scaling the research and the data and analytics staff. What I also saw was that their first attention went to paying attention to metrics that mattered to HR, making HR more effective. Being able to finally do a headcount report, focusing on turnover, looking at what's the effectiveness of a particular program or a practice. Like, does university relations get us more good hires than some other recruiting source? And it was only when they had comfort and familiarity with using people analytics that their attention focused to, what's the business impact of people analytics and addressing the metrics that really matter to our C-suite. They want to make more money, they want to make profit, they want to improve profit margins. If they're in healthcare, maybe they want to, for sure they want to improve patient satisfaction through the use of people analytics. So that's what I saw 3 years ago, that organizations are on a journey to value. And organizations that are starting today, I think, kind of do the same journey, but they probably kind of go to business and strategic value earlier because so many have gone before them. The other thing I found was that the more advanced organizations that were a little bit more mature had these characteristics. One was that they were able to pull together into a platform data from their HR management system, their talent management solutions, their operational data, and their financial data. And by having all of that, they could actually be able to do some of that analysis about how does the workforce affect business outcomes. Another thing was almost all the time, they practiced change management and they drove their organizations towards a culture of making data-driven decisions. And then the other thing, and this wasn't quite as common but equally important, was that they had a governance approach that demanded that they be able to show return on investment from their people analytics effort. First to make the case, but then also just to continue doing any kind of people analytics work. So 3 key characteristics of more mature organizations. Probably resonates with all of you because you're doing something with people analytics. Okay, so I feel so fortunate in having a lab of 150 organizations to look at, to see where they're creating value. I keep wanting to say laboratory, but I am not English, but it just sounds cool. Anyway, I've had the opportunity to actually talk to probably 60, 70 of our 150 enterprise customers. And because I like to think in frameworks, I like to categorize things, what I discovered was that there are moments that matter that drive value for the use of analytics. And they're first of all across the employee life cycle with activities around attracting the workforce, developing them, and retaining them. And after listening to Kathy and Darius this morning, I'll probably change those 3 categories because I really like her kind of future of talent management. But this is what I found, that there's moments that matter in these activities. And the other thing is that there are certain organizational effectiveness activities around planning, optimizing productivity, and optimizing the structure of the organization. So I want to share some stories with you, and I'm going to stay on this next slide for longer than you're probably going to want. and just talk through some of the places that I'm seeing organizations find hard dollar value. They are getting cost savings, they're making revenue as a result of using people analytics. So the first area in talent acquisition analytics, it enables you to look at, what are you spending to get new hires, the various approaches that you're using to get new hires. And so you can kind of optimize your spend between, is it job referrals? Is it university relations programs? Is it, newspaper advertisements? Where are you most cost effectively getting new hires? But I think the more impactful way of looking at talent acquisition analytics is when you can actually do analytics across all of your employee data and see where you've got great hires. Where are your top hires? What is their performance? What are their capabilities? Where did they come from? And use that kind of data then to optimize getting new hires. And one of our customers actually made the case for acquiring a people analytics solution based on their belief that by understanding better where quality of hires come from, they could actually improve their revenue by $7 million. And I promise you that I will continue to track this company and make sure that they actually are getting what they set out as their goal. So in terms of developing the workforce, learning analytics, again, it can help you optimize the effectiveness of your various training approaches. Is it a course? Is it just-in-time learning? Is it, on the job? Which is, having the biggest impact on company performance, on revenue. My favorite story, though, comes from an organization, one of the smaller organizations that actually had a turnover problem. And they found out where their turnover problem was, and then they took a number of different actions to improve on lowering turnover. But because they had a governance approach, they had to show the return on investment of their various actions. So not just the use of analytics, but also their actions. And so they looked at what's the impact of giving pay raises? What's the impact of better improving our onboarding? What's the impact of encouraging managers to set realistic career expectations? And then what's the impact of actually training or upskilling retained employees? And it was that last one that by upskilling, giving them new training for the retained employees, they actually got an additional $200,000 of revenue per retained employee and a total return of $2.5 million. Retention. You read so much about stories about organizations that are using people analytics to improve turnover. And not just turnover at the aggregate, but typically looking at turnover by specific roles. And we've had the opportunity to look across all of our customers who've had an analytics solution in place for a number of years. And we've seen that the role of manager, they've actually been able to reduce manager turnover by 17% compared to the market by having people analytics. The point of that is that you're going to end up focusing on being more granular, and you're looking at turnover. Okay, in terms of organizational effectiveness, and by the way, improving engagement and diversity leads to increased revenue. We're seeing lots of reports on that in the aggregate, that organizations that have more females in executive positions, that have more diverse teams, have higher revenue, have higher profits. I haven't seen it yet at an individual company level, but everyone that has been doing D&I work says we know it's helping us be more competitive as hirers, and there is a dollar value to that. Organizational effectiveness. So workforce planning, being able to improve headcount projections, it results in operating expense reductions. We've got a couple of customers that said that they've been able to kind of fine-tune their hiring. They don't have to have as many open requisitions, and that the impact of that has been on the order of $75 to $100 million. And there's also a direct cost savings then that ends up in they have lower attracting recruiting costs. In terms of improving productivity, I actually think that this is the area that organizations should be focused on, because we have this one customer that says that over the last 3 years, they have saved $500 million by improving productivity. They're a healthcare organization, and what they did was they created a productivity index that for every patient care service identified the optimal number of hours to give optimal patient care, and then they monitored against that. And by doing that, they were able to close open requisitions. They were able to stop having to pay overtime. They were able to stop having to pay for premium pay nursing staff. And while that's an example of optimizing productivity in healthcare, I think you can kind of get ideas maybe for your own organizations where you might be able to do something similar, and that by improving productivity, you're able to reduce costs somewhere else. And then the last area, optimizing spans and layers. So to the extent that organizations can increase their span of control, they're reducing their costs. The one example I've got is of an organization that went from a span of control of 8 to a span of control of 10. So needing less managers, the effect for them was about $140 million. Optimizing span of control and layers doesn't always yield cost savings. Sometimes you're going to get fewer employees reporting to a manager, but you're going to get the impact of improved revenue. And we hear this from companies that their sales departments, they're finding that a sales manager having 2 or 3 people report to him or her actually results in improved revenue. But of course, there's a greater cost in having more managers. So I see lots of questions. Questions? What do you think of these? I mean, these are cases that we have shown hard dollar, mostly cost savings, but some revenue improvement. Does it help you in any way to kind of think through places that you might be making new cases for doing people analytics? Did you have a question? I'm sorry.
Personally, I was just interested in how they were measuring the impact on. Hi. It's really interesting. I was just thinking, how do you estimate the value of upskilling the employees? So how do you put a dollar on upskilling resources?
Upscaling, yeah. Okay, so you're doing additional training and then monitoring what it is that they're bringing in terms of revenue. This happened to be a customer service position, so it was pretty easy to see the revenue that customer service people were bringing in. And retained employees were bringing in an additional $200,000 because they got training on additional products that they could sell to customers. More questions? Okay. Can I get geeky with you for a minute? So have any of you done any structural equation modeling? Okay. Okay, so this is a value chain analysis that basically shows, through structural equation modeling, which I think is kind of the closest we can get to causation as opposed to just correlation, that the adoption of people analytics and a set of very common sense practices actually predicts higher financial performance in terms of, in this case, we were measuring profit margins and return on assets through intervening variables of improving HR and talent outcomes and improving business outcomes. So let me walk you through this just a bit. So it wasn't just the adoption of people analytics, it was also doing change management. It was also having multiple sources of data coming from HR and financials. It was having lots of different analytics topics that were being analyzed. It was also not just having HR and analytics people use analytics, but also business leaders and people managers using people analytics. I mentioned change management. Okay, what that did was it predicted higher HR outcomes, including things like, just having better data for making decisions, improving talent management, improving employee engagement. That in turn predicted improved business outcomes like higher competitive advantage, more innovation, and that then predicted the higher financial performance. And increasing these components actually predicted a 1% to 2% improvement in those financial metrics. And I'd love to see some organization actually use this methodology internally to show that what they're doing with people analytics actually has an impact on your financial performance. So, okay, not too geeky? Those that know structural equation modeling, do you kind of get how we did it? Okay, there's a book chapter coming out soon on this. Okay, but what I really want to talk about is what's the value of all of this work that we're doing with people analytics on the employee? And I think, my thinking about this actually came from a conversation that I had with Al in Philadelphia a couple of years ago. And he said, you're always focused on showing the value proposition to the organization, but we need to be using data for the good of people. So what's the value proposition that people analytics can have for people? So I have never spoken about this before. I've written about it, so bear with me, and I unfortunately have to have a few notes here. Ever the researcher, I like to kind of have a way to categorize value. So I started with Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And if any of you are psychologists out there, you can speak about this much more effectively than I can. But basically, the theory behind this states that after fundamental physiological and safety needs are met, a person becomes motivated by belonging and esteem needs. And once those needs are met, then they seek self-actualization to reach their full potential. And then to self-transcendence, really moving beyond just meeting their own personal needs to also meet some more universal goals. By the way, this presentation is available to all of you. I love it that you're taking pictures, but you can also have a copy of this. So this is where we started, but then we adapted it to an employee's hierarchy of needs in a data-driven world. So here, the meeting needs within the work environment includes things like fair pay, benefits, support of a work-life balance, safety. We looked at that as meeting needs in terms of having privacy with your data, abiding by GDPR, or in California to CCPA, making it clear that decisions are fairly being made with evidence-based decision making. For job enrichment, the organization should optimize the employee experience in their digitization efforts, engage in employee recognition, as recognition always helps build esteem. And then to enable employees to achieve full potential, organizations should support career growth through job enrichment, having obvious ways to develop their career that also gives them additional financial benefit through things like continuous learning and leadership development. And then to support employees to be more purpose-driven, organizations should consider that their own, they have an impact on society and the environment. And of course, engage in ethical behavior in terms of data use, and generally at least be conscious that employees too have their own needs to be purpose-driven. So does this kind of work as a framework? Does it give you ideas for how you can use analytics to serve employees for the good? Ideas? Or do you just want to hear me talk? I need to rest my voice for a minute. Please.
I see employee recognition in both job enrichment and engagement.
I'm sloppy.
Lexy, can you repeat the question?
Her question was that she saw employee recognition in 2 places, and basically I was sloppy. But I will talk about that. Really, the point of recognition is that it meets an important need of people to either be engaged or to be enriched. I love it when I'm recognized for performance. But I'll talk through these a little bit. Anybody else have ideas using this framework for ways that analytics can be used for the good of employees? Okay, you're going to make me walk through my ideas. Okay, so in the working environment, using analytics to model your compensation practices to achieve fair pay for organizations, having enabling your employees to use data to make their own choices about how they're going to use their pay. Like, I know some organizations are starting to provide financial planning services to their employees. So an idea for using data for the good and analytics for the good to ensure that employees, have that lowest level of on Maslow's hierarchy, which is the I can't even remember what I said. The meeting their physiological needs. I get myself off track a little bit. Let me get back on track. Another one about safety needs, giving employees control over their scheduling. And we heard about this with Dr. Jeffrey Pfeiffer this morning. So using automated tools to help employees choose their own schedule of work based on data about what the company needs as well as about employee availability. And there was an interesting value proposition here. We actually found research that said that employees would give up a raise if they could have more flexibility in their scheduling. So there's a value to the organization, and flexibility is, of course, a value to employees. I talked a bit about, just using data safely, abiding by GDPR, CCPA standards. but also giving employees the right to influence how their data is being used. And I've got 5 minutes left. I'm going to go real fast here. Providing data-supported tools to connect with mentors and teammates, using organizational network analysis to ensure that employees aren't overloaded, and providing tools to get them up to speed fast, to make them productive. I love having my little metrics monitor thing that tells me if I'm on track for the year. I actually think that people like to know that they're being productive and that they're meeting requirements. And that's where recognition comes in, that some of those systems can actually automatically provide recognition, although honestly, I'd rather have it from my boss or my colleagues. But recognition builds esteem. I think probably the biggest advance recently, though, has been using analytics in career pathing. And there's so much that's being done here. So, any more ideas about how analytics might be used? Do you have another comment about this? Okay, I'm going to go to my last slide.
Actually, you've got someone in the press.
I just had a small question.
Yep.
On the top purpose-driven, I guess I'm curious if you are saying as purpose-driven, are you saying that we need to incentivize people to feel that, or to give them some sort of like environmental or ethical impact, or that we need to make them feel that their own work is having a societal impact? Does that make sense?
I mean, what I'm really saying is that some of us want to have that kind of impact, and I think organizations should recognize that. So, kind of maybe make the connection clear about what the organization's purpose is beyond its own financial bottom line, in the community, in society, impacting climate change, making it clear that there's opportunities to, participate in activities there. I know I loved it when our last all hands, when we got everybody together, in a team building thing, and we built bicycles for at-risk employees, at-risk kids in the community where we're headquartered. So just giving them opportunity to actually, do something for the good outside of themselves. So just, I had, Hal also asked me to think about, well, how do these two intersect? And that was one of the areas that I think, there's an intersection between creating organizational value and employee value. The career path analytics, optimizing productivity is both good for the organization and, good for the employee. At least in my case, I like feeling productive. I feel better at the end of the day if I know I accomplished something. And then always ethics and good data hygiene being critical to both. We've got lots of resources, all of the white papers that describe this stuff. I think I'm a better writer than a speaker, so download the economic impact of people analytics, and we're updating that quite soon on some of the cases that I talk through. The employee value proposition, there's a white paper on that, just really to stimulate your thinking about what is it you're doing with people analytics that's not only good for the organization, but good for employees. And we've got all of our case stories too.